Alrighty. Well, it is very, there's Rocky. It's very cold in here. Um, it's -7 degrees Celsius in here, or 18 degrees Fahrenheit. But outside it is, um, outside it's minus 18 Celsius, or 0.4 Fahrenheit. So it's even colder outside. Not that it makes a huge difference when you're dealing with this kind of cold. I got the heater on, but it's going to take a while to warm the place up. It'll probably take 2 or 3 hours to get any kind of heat at all in here. And so I have to keep the window closed, even though the heater puts out fumes and stuff, because that's just how it is. I got it, because otherwise the heat will never build up in here. But anyway, where we're at right now is, we're in Canada. We're in Ontario, Canada, in eastern Ontario, Canada, about 50 miles west of the city of Ottawa, which of course is the capital of the country. And I mean, I'm living a pretty rough life, but I'm not the only one. Right now, the country is full of people who are living the same way, or even rougher in many cases. And there's a good reason for that. There's a very good reason for that. And I'm going to lay it on the line here. I'm going to tell you what it is. Some people will be offended. If you are, you are. It's just my opinion. You know, I've been around the block a little bit, though. I'm 56 years old, and I have not led an easy life, even before this situation. I saw lots of corruption. And I'm just going to lay it on the line for you. And we're all sinners, so this is not a judgment thing on my part. I'm as much a sinner as anyone. My sin may be different than your sin, but it's all sin. God doesn't grade sin. You know, God doesn't say, well, this sin is acceptable and this other sin isn't. You know, no sin is acceptable to God. That's why we need Jesus, you know. Because on our own, we can't get into heaven, because there's not one of us that isn't sinful, at least to a degree. I mean, we judge each other on a sliding scale that way, depending on our own personal ideas and so on. So, you know, we'll judge one sin to be worse than another and all that. But with God, if there's any sin at all, you're out. You know, you're unacceptable. And so that's why we need Jesus to be our intermediary with God. But here's the thing. Canada has forsaken decency. You know, it's forsaken God, and it's forsaken decency. Canada has become a country which embraces sin and loves sin. Now, I'm not saying that virtually everybody is just out there, yay, sin, isn't sin great? Yay. I'm not saying that. I know not everybody's doing that. But the country itself has done that. It's rejected God. It's embraced sin. It's embraced corruption. It's rejected any kind of principled ideas or moral ideas or whatever. We're a country that has embraced every kind of perversion imaginable. We're a country that has embraced abortion. We're a country that has embraced euthanasia. We're just, you know, we're killing people in this country at an alarming rate. And, people will argue and say, oh, no, we're not. And there's very strict requirements and all that, and you can't just go and get MAID, which is medical assistance in dying, without meeting all these requirements. The thing about it is, it's a system, and like any other system, it can be manipulated, it can be gamed, and it can be used in certain ways that it shouldn't be. And the medical profession in this country, well, let's just say they're an awful corrupt bunch for the most part. There are a few good individuals within the system. I'm not saying there aren't. But generally speaking, the medical system is a wicked, corrupt thing. In this country, it really is. And so they've embraced all this stuff. The system has embraced it. And there are people being told that really they need to avail themselves of MAID. I'd be told I need to avail myself of it because I'm a 56-year-old homeless man and I have some lung issues and some other health problems. And I'd be told that I should do it. I don't go near doctors. I'm actually terrified of doctors because of just a lifetime of bad experiences with them. Not that every experience has been bad. I've had a very small handful of good experiences. But I've had a lifetime, really. For every good experience I've had, I've probably had 10 or 20 bad experiences. And so, I'm really scared of doctors. I'm really scared of hospitals. I had a friend that was in the hospital, and I wanted to visit them. And I had to work myself up to it. This is just back now about, probably 10 or 15 years ago. I had to actually screw up my courage to walk into the hospital. And I wasn't a patient, I was a visitor. But even to go in there as a visitor, I mean, I have such a fear of hospitals and of medical people because of the things that they've subjected me to, that I'm really terrified of all of that whole system. It scares the hell out of me. And even to be around it, I mean, I think for me, going into a hospital is similar to the anxiety I experience would be similar to the anxiety that somebody, say, who's going to watch an execution by electric chair might experience. Where you're going to go and you're going to watch this thing and you're not the one being executed. Like, that there's no reason to believe anything bad is going to happen to you. But you're still going to have an awful lot of anxiety going into that prison, knowing what's going to happen and that you're going to be there when it happens. And that's pretty much the anxiety I experience if I have to go into a hospital, even as a visitor. And if I have to go in as a patient, it's even worse. And they won't accept me as a patient now anyway. They've barred me from the hospital because I wouldn't wear a mask in the hospital. They said that I had committed attempted murder against everybody in the building by not wearing a mask. Well, if I had committed attempted murder against everyone in the building, then the police should have been called and I should have been charged. Everybody in the building should have been counted, and I should have been charged with that many counts of attempted murder, if that's the case. So that was a stupid accusation for them to make. But again, that's our medical system, just horrible anyway. But basically, though, when a nation forsakes God, when the nation says, yeah, well, F you, God, we're smarter than you are, we're better than you are, we're more enlightened, we're more this, we're more that than you are, we don't need you, get lost. When a nation says that the God, which Canada has done, like I say, not every single person in Canada, I know that, but the nation collectively has done that. Our government has done it. All our various systems have done it. A good majority of the citizenry has done it. Not everybody, but a good majority. You know, when a nation does that, this is where we end up. I mean, if you look at the stories in the Bible, when the Jews had left Egypt and they were wandering in the desert for 40 years, the reason that they wandered in the desert for 40 years is because they kept doing what we're doing here. God would have made it a straight trip from Egypt to the Promised Land. It would have taken them maybe 40 days to get there instead of 40 years. But it's because they wouldn't listen to God. And it's because they kept getting involved in all kinds of weird stuff, idol worship and weird sexual practices and everything else. And all stuff that God has specifically warned us against. And they weren't fit. They were not fit to enter the Promised Land in that state. And so God kept them wandering. Now, he watched over them and he looked after them in the sense that he sent them manna, to eat and all that. He didn't forsake them, but they had forsaken him, or at least they were off and on with it. They'd forsake him, and then they'd come back to him, and then they'd forsake him again, and this went on for 40 years. And it was only when they had been put through the ringer enough that they realized that, God really is where it's at, that they were allowed to enter the Promised Land. So I mean, anyway, the bottom line is when a nation does what we're doing here in Canada, it will pay. You may think you're not going to pay, but you'll pay. And that's the thing anyway. It's like collectively, Canada has become, and it has been for quite a while, a really corrupt nation. I call Canada a shithole and people get mad at me, but it is a shithole. I mean, look, we have massive unemployment. We have so much corruption in government. It's friggin' terrible. We have a police force that can't be trusted. All right across the country, the police forces in this country cannot be trusted. The courts cannot be trusted. I mean, we have a police force that does not protect. We have courts that do not serve justice. We have a medical system that does not heal. And in fact, they all do the opposite of what they're supposed to do. There was a saying about Canada years ago that Canada stood for peace, order, and good government. Well, that was prior to us rejecting God. Now we've rejected God, so it stands for chaos, disorder, and bad government. That's what we've got. Those are all things of the devil. Those aren't things of God. The devil brings chaos and disorder. God brings peace, contentment. All good things come from God. Love. The devil brings all that other stuff that we're experiencing now. I just saw statistics scrolling through the interwebs here. 10,000 homeless people in Montreal alone, in the city of Montreal alone. The little town here that's close by to where I am, the town of Smith Falls, Ontario, it has a population of 12,000. The town of Perth, where I come from, where I was raised, has a population of 6,000. It's half the population of Smith Falls. And it's just literally 12 miles from Smiths Falls. And so basically, it's like the entire population of Perth plus another 4,000. That's the homeless population in the city of Montreal alone. Or the entire population of Smiths Falls minus 2,000. That's the population that's homeless in the city of Montreal, Quebec. Now, that's just Montreal. What about Toronto? What about Ottawa? What about Vancouver, Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, St. John, St. John's? They're two different cities, St. John and St. John's. Um, you know, Bathurst. I don't know. We can go on and on. Lunenburg. I don't know, but you know what I mean. Um, all the cities across Canada, and then all the rural areas like where I am. Look, I'm homeless, and I'm in a rural area. So, you know, the population of homeless in this country, if I actually had the numbers here, it'd probably be mind-blowing. And that's because our economy is collapsing. And our economy is collapsing because we have decided that we like this to be corrupt. And again, when corruption comes in, then the economy collapses, because what happens then is the most corrupt people end up being the strongest people. They go to the top of the food chain in that situation. And then they basically bleed the rest of us dry. They take everything for themselves and they leave us with nothing. That's what happens when you say, we're just going to reject God. And without realizing it, what they've done is, we reject God. Well, if we reject God, then we embrace Lucifer. And when Lucifer's in charge, that's how it is. The worst, dirtiest, nastiest pricks rise to the top, and they just bleed the rest of us dry. That's how a Luciferian system works. So anyway, good on you, Canada. You've embraced Lucifer. You've rejected God. And we're all guilty of it to a degree. Some of us have done it passively. Some of us have done it actively. Some of us have allowed our sin to overtake us in certain ways and stuff. But, I mean, right now, I notice it even on social media. There's a lot of hatred for Christians, for one thing. And not only that, but the people are proud of their sin. And the people are really disgusting about it. Like, it's actually really disgusting. They're like up in your face with it, and stuff. And it's like, there isn't even any shame anymore. There isn't even any, like you wouldn't want people to know that you do this thing, whatever it is you do. It's like, now it's right up in your face. Yeah, I do it, so what? And people will even say things like F God and stuff like that, like, what the hell is wrong with people? Like, really? F God? What a thing to say. Like, I look at that and I say, you got to be kidding. And then you wonder why we're in the state we're in. And they'll claim that we're in a good state. Oh, things are better than they've ever been. No, they're not. No, they're not. They're not better than they've ever been. I mean, look around you. They're not. We got a few assholes at the top of the food chain that are just bleeding the rest of us dry. And here I am laying in a freaking camper, freezing my ass off, and I'm just one of what probably amounts to hundreds of thousands. Because you got to figure if there's 10,000 in Montreal alone, times that by every other major city in the country, and then add to it all the ones like me that are living this way in the rural areas. And then while we're at it, we can do some subcategories. How many people are sitting in prison right now? How many people are still in a house or an apartment, but they're on the verge of losing it? Like they're actually going through the process now of being evicted, so they're going to be on the street. Or they're one paycheck away from eviction or foreclosure. How many people like that are out there that are just barely, just teetering on the edge of homelessness? We'll make another subcategory for them. How many of those are in this country right now? How many people have availed themselves of this wicked, evil medical assistance in dying program because they're afraid to be homeless, or because they are homeless and they can't stand it anymore, or whatever? How many people, and people will say, oh, that doesn't happen, but it does. It does happen. Doctors are actively encouraging people, and they're working the system in such a way that they can get you killed if you agree to it. And here's the other thing. I found in Canada, everything starts out voluntary. Doesn't matter what it is, everything starts out voluntary. And then once enough people volunteer for a thing, then it becomes mandatory for the rest of us who won't volunteer. So how long before somebody like me becomes a fugitive from the system? Because the system says, okay, we've deemed you surplus to our needs, and we want you gone. And I won't cooperate. They say, okay, we need you to come in at such and such a time for your euthanization. We need you to report to your local hospital. That'd be the one time they'd let me in, I suppose, and not call the police on me would be if I was going there to be euthanized. Instead, they'd call the police on me for not showing up, and there'd be a manhunt. I'd become a fugitive. How long before that happens? I believe that's coming. I really do. If we keep going at the rate we're going and going down the road we're going down. So it's voluntary now, yes. But, back in the 60s, getting a safety check on your car was voluntary. It was 1968 that the mandatory safety check came in. Back in the 90s, getting an emissions test on your car was mandatory. And it was like 1997 or 98 when they brought in the mandatory emissions testing. Before that, it was voluntary. And so on. And I've known of so many other things in Canada that started out voluntary and then became mandatory. And they do that here because they want you to think that it was your idea. That's what it is, And once enough people go along with it, then they know that there's only a small remnant that won't go along with it, so they'll pass a law then to deal with those people. And, the more people, every time somebody avails themselves of the MAID program, of the Medical Assistance in Dying program, they actually are voting for that to become mandatory. And it'll be, if the powers that be decide that your existence should come to an end, then this is what they'll do. Anyway, the fact that we're doing this wholesale murder thing in Canada, Again, how can God bless a nation that's doing this stuff? How can God bless a nation that has embraced murder, sexual perversion, abortion, corruption of every kind? This just embrace death and theft and corruption and perversion. You know, we can't call a pedophile anymore in Canada. A pedophile is now a MAP, and MAP stands for minor attracted person, because pedophile sounds harsh. So if you're a man that likes to cornhole little boys, I'm not allowed to call you a pedophile. It's socially unacceptable, and it's semi-illegal. It could be considered a hate crime on my part, you know. So there is some wiggle room there for the law where they could potentially lay some sort of a charge against me for calling a pedophile, you know. And they're trying to pass laws through now to make it that it will be a crime, or that say, like, if some pedophile watches this video and hears what I just said and says, oh my God, that guy could be a threat to me, he could haul me up before a tribunal. This is a law that they're trying to get through. It's called Bill C-63. And I could end up under house arrest for a year, and I could end up having to pay the pedophile $30,000 and another $50,000 to the government as a fine. And there's even the potential there for a life sentence for somebody like me who will say these things. And not only that, but if that law passes, it would be retroactive. So it's not the law yet, but they'll be able to go back and look at this video and say, we got you. You just said that you resent not being allowed to call a pedophile a pedophile. That's hate. We've got you, Tom. They can do that. They will be able to under this law, because it's going to be retroactive. They can go back through everything you've ever written, everything you've ever said, and they can use that against you. They can use that to put you under house arrest, to make you pay big fines, or even to put you in prison for the rest of your life. In Canada, we do life sentences for murder. But now our government wants to do life sentences for speech. Just think about that. And I'll tell you something else. When you lose free speech, everything else goes out the window. Because when you get that you can't legally complain, where you have to just keep your mouth shut and put up with stuff, then you can't protest. You can't argue. You can't object. And when you can't protest, argue, or object, then those who mean you harm can just steamroll over you. What are you going to do about it? You can't even say anything. That's the reason they want to do away with free speech, you know. And in Canada, it'll be easy to do because our Constitution doesn't guarantee us free speech. Our Constitution guarantees us the right to free expression within reasonable limits. Well, who says what's a reasonable limit? Who decides that? Okay, Rocky, you're very heavy, sweetie. I love you, but you're freaking heavy. When he's standing on me with his feet like that, which of course he would be standing on his feet because that's what his feet are for. But it's like the pressure is just, I love the little guy, but holy smokes, he's a big boy. You're a big boy, Rocky, you are. Anyway, that's the bottom line anyway, though, about it. It's like, if you can't even say anything, well, these things, well, bad things happen to you, well, things are done to you, then things are just going to be done to you. That's all. And like I say, in Canada, it's all open to interpretation. What is a free expression within reason, within reasonable limits? Now, to me, it may be completely different than it is to you. And to you, it may be completely different than it is to somebody else. So who decides? Well, it'll be a judge in a court of law that will decide. And our judges are appointed by the government. Most of the judges in Canada right now are appointed by Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, or as we call him in Canada, the Crime Minister. But I guess calling him the Crime Minister is also hate speech, and could get a guy like me a life sentence, or at the very least a year under house arrest and massive fines. I could be told I victimized the Prime Minister by referring to him as the Crime Minister. And I could be sent under house. Well, look, under house, what, in the camper here? They're going to put an ankle bracelet on me and say, go back to your camper. Plus, the other thing is, how do you put a homeless guy under house arrest, But the other thing is, too, they could say you got to pay Justin Trudeau $30,000 because you victimized him by calling him the Crime Minister. And you got to pay the government $50,000. Well, I don't have that kind of money. Good luck getting that. But anyway, that's the bottom line, though. That this is what's happening in Canada. We've forsaken God. We've embraced all manner of corruption, and here we are. All right, good for us. We'll talk to you later, I guess, on that cheerful note.